As I record this, it is May 18, 2020, and you are listening to the Failed State Update with Joseph L. Flatley. On this edition of Failed State Update, we will discuss the intersection of the UFO scene and military intelligence with author and self-described crackpot historian Adam Gorightly. The convergence of the two things was revealed in the 1980s when a UFO researcher named Bill Moore disclosed that he had been working with and manipulated by something called the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and an agent named Rick Doty. This story begins in 1979 with a military contractor named Paul Bennewitz, who apparently stumbled upon top-secret military projects. When he reported his findings to Kirtland Air Force Base security, Bennewitz was hooked up with an agent named Rick Doty, who ended up feeding him and then others in the UFO scene false information in an apparent attempt to obscure the fact that these were military projects that Paul Bennewitz had stumbled upon. For the kids, we're going to talk about Tom DeLonge of Blink-182 and his bizarre UFO think tank, the To the Stars Academy. So when you hear Adam and I talking about TTSA, that's the organization we're discussing. We're also going to pose the question whether best-selling author Annie Jacobson is part of a similar intelligence operation that struck Paul Bennewitz and roped in Bill Moore. But that's enough for me. Let's talk to Adam Gorightly. I don't know how familiar you are with my podcast, The Failed State Update, but really it's, looking at the state of the country and the real surreal state of the country. Like, the fact that, we basically live in a cyberpunk dystopia now, and all these things that were interesting or were concerns of people kind of on the fringe over the last 30 years are now, they're on the TV news. And so people are going to be like, why are you talking about UFOs on this show? But maybe you could just start by explaining who Paul Bennewitz is and kind of that story. Does that make sense?
Sure. Back in '69, Bennewitz founded a company called Thunder Scientific Corporation. He did a lot of government contracts for the Air Force, basically developing different calibration measurement instruments for avionics. And he started in '69. He was based right out of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Basically, his house was right on the outskirts. He could look into Kirtland Air Force Base. I was in '69. In 1979, he started seeing UFOs around Kirtland Base, and that was kind of the beginning of his odyssey and his involvement in ufology and also looking into cattle mutilations, a lot of the weirdness that was going on, kind of starting around that time. And so his concern, he actually started filming quote-unquote UFOs and taking photographs of them, and he became kind of concerned because he saw them different parts of the base that could be seen as a national security threat over the area called the Monsanto weapons area, which housed like the largest cache of nuclear weapons during that period, or one of the largest caches. So he contacted the brass there at Kirtland Base, the security officers, and let them know about what was going on there. And so he became in contact with the folks there, and he actually went in and gave a presentation on what he had seen to try to start a partnership and get some answers. What the hell was going on there? Was this something they were testing? Was it alien craft? Who knows? According to some sources, the Air Force recruited him at that time, although the Air Force denied that. But what Bennewitz said, they recruited him into an effort against the aliens who were supposedly involved there at Kirtland, but also involved in an area north of there in Dulce, New Mexico, where they supposedly had a secret underground base that Bennewitz discovered, or he was kind of led to discover by his quote-unquote handlers, one of whom was allegedly Richard Doty. And that kind of started the whole Dulce base mythos legend.
First of all, like Kirtland Air Force Base, like what goes on there?
Being developed at Kirtland were a lot of stealth technologies of the period, as well as other things dealing with, for instance, laser communications with satellites. And this is what, according to people who've looked deeply into it, like my friend Greg Bishop and Christopher Lambright and Bill Moore as well, talked about this. What they collectively thought Bennewitz stumbled upon had to do with these laser-based technologies dealing with communication, with lasers and secret, basically a secret coded communications program, not only, for dealing with our satellites, but also, disabling Russian satellites or other satellites up there. And this is a lot of what you hear going on with technology nowadays, and things like Space Force. It has to do with these satellite wars and that type of stuff. And Bennewitz was not only filming UFOs and photographing them, but he was also picking up on these coded communications, and that is what really concerned the brass there at Kirtland Air Force Base, and also the NSA as well got involved with looking at Bennewitz, because what Bennewitz was doing with these communications, he was trying to decode them, and it looked like he was getting close to that. And so that's where, the AFOSI and Doty, NSA, et cetera, got involved in seeing what Bennewitz was doing and who he was communicating with. Was he possibly communicating to foreign nationals, and a lot of the foreign nationals and agents, Russians, Chinese, were very interested in ufology during that period, and probably still are now, and had kind of infiltrated a lot of the different UFO groups of that period. And a lot of the people involved in UFO groups, MUFON and APRO were a couple of them, were also, a lot of these members were involved in the defense contracting as civilians. So there was all this overlap going on. And so ultimately, what Doty and the rest wanted to do was basically misinform Bennewitz, disinform him, confuse him to what the signals and whatnot he was picking up, and ultimately have him spread disinformation and confuse all of this with like it was alien technologies and aliens that were behind, all the secret testing that was going on at Kirtland, and also at whatever was going on out at Dulce, which also involved cattle mutilations and possibly some secret program going on there with testing cattle. This gets so complicated and convoluted, but a lot of people think it involved something that was called Project Plowshare that went on in the late 60s, where they were testing, doing some underground nuclear explosions, basically to release natural gas. So, as a way of tapping into that, but it really didn't work out too well because it released radiation into the atmosphere. This went on, it was like an early form of fracking. And this went on in the Dulce area. And so, one of the theories is that later, a lot of the cattle mutilations was basically a cover for some secret government program where they were testing cattle for radiation exposure. And there has been a lot of cases, in that area of cancer in the wildlife and humans as well.
So Bennewitz was involved in MUFON and kind of these different, was kind of getting into the UFO underground, and then when he contacted Kirtland Air Force Base, saying that he had seen these things and picked up these things on his equipment, the call went to the AFOSI. What is AFOSI, and who is Doty, and how did that work?
AFOSI is Air Force Office of Special Investigation. They're the security there at the base, and they're basically special agents that work on cases, and it's like the FBI or something with special agents who deal with counterintelligence. And so it became a counterintelligence operation. They were monitoring Bennewitz to find out who he knew, who his contacts were. And that's kind of where researcher Bill Moore came into it, because AFOSI recruited him and got more involved in basically helping infiltrate ufology, meeting with people like Paul Bennewitz and others in ufology to find out what they were learning, what they knew about secret projects. Remember, because like I was saying, a lot of these were people involved in defense contracting, to see if they were leaking classified information, because some of these folks possibly had classified information, but also to misinform them too about some of the stuff they were seeing, so it had to deal with classified information. Classic counterintelligence stuff. You want to find out and also if the Russians and Chinese, what their knowledge was, because they were infiltrating, get involved in these different organizations. So it was a counterintelligence, a national, quote unquote, national security operation. One of these was to disinform Paul Bennewitz and spread this disinformation that what was being seen at Kirtland were possibly ETs and UFOs. What these signals were ETs, not really what was going on there with all this laser research. And the same thing going on with Dulce, where they were, once again, allegedly, there's a lot of information to support this, where they were testing stealth technology. Remember, this was the period where a lot of that stealth technology research was really going at that time, with developing these stealth bombers and whatnot. And so, yeah, it's a mix of a lot of crazy things with these UFO stories inserted in there just to disinform people.
When did the intelligence community, or aspects of the intelligence community, kind of pick up on the UFO scene and inject itself in it? Were they always interested or always involved?
Yeah, it seems like it pretty early on, with all the different investigations. But these are secret classified operation, so we don't know for sure. I mean, really, a lot of this came out with Doty's involvement, and there was freedom of information requests that where people became aware of this, through a group called CAUS, CAUS. It was a citizens UFO group with like Peter Gersten was their lawyer, and they put in these FOIA requests because there was public reports of this stuff going on at Dulce, and that's where Doty's name came up in the documents, and that's where eventually Doty got busted. I mean, this came out around 84, and shortly after he got shipped to West Germany, as did his commanding officer, and supposedly Doty was stripped of his special agent status. Doty later said it had nothing to do with the stuff going on at Kirtland, but the timing was certainly reflected that was probably the case. And what I've been told by like Greg Valdez, who is Gabe Valdez's son, is that Doty was basically got in trouble because he got a little too became a little willy-nilly sharing classified information. And the deal with the classified information was that Doty was like putting out bits and pieces of stuff just to see what different UFO researchers picked up on, to see what they were aware of these secret programs. Now, some people say that Doty was a rogue agent, but the rogue thing might be actually a cover for the operation. It was just that way that the Air Force could say, well, yeah, he got out of hand with the Bennewitz affair, but, once the rogue thing might be a cover in itself.
Did he get outed then through like the FOIA requests and this group CAUS? Like, would he, if they hadn't stumbled upon him, we possibly would never have heard of him? Is that what?
Right, yeah. I mean, people knew about him, obviously, but like Bill Moore was working with him and other folks, but maybe Moore would have never came clean if these, documents and information didn't come out.
Dulce is a quiet, unassuming town nestled in northern New Mexico. Many of its residents are members of the Jicarilla Apache tribe. They swear.
I tell stories, but my nose isn't growing.
They are not making this up.
They threw down a ladder from that spaceship, and then two small people started climbing down.
Jerry Julian says she had her first extraterrestrial encounter right here on her Dulce ranch about 40 years ago.
It was huge. I just saw the bottom of it. It was like flat like this.
Many of her neighbors claim similar strange sightings.
Fat in the middle and kind of like rounded on the sides. You're speechless, You just don't know what to think, It's just like, it's like nothing you've ever encountered before.
Why are stories of the extraordinary ordinary here?
I do not know. Probably in kind of that big mountain we have right there,
Rumor has it there is a secret base hidden underneath the Archuleta Mesa here. The mountain overlooks Dulce. Some people in town say the base is run by aliens working with our federal government to conduct mind control and genetic experiments. Do you believe that?
Yeah. Well, a whole bunch of people seen it,
Like the ground opened up, steam coming out of it.
They also claim they've seen some creatures cooked up in those experiments, like Bigfoot and something half human.
Down this way, the waist down, it's a goat.
Just to take this a step further, to Dulce, Bennewitz went out there, and he was a private pilot. He was flying, he'd take these recon trips to Dulce. And now he became convinced that he was finding evidence of a secret base or something going on there, and he was taking photos where he discovered this method. I don't know that much about photography, but I've been told the shutter speed has changed to 1,000th of a second. He started at first unwittingly photographing. He just photographed the landscape. Then when he developed the photos, UFOs would show up, and then they appeared to be coming out of this Archuleta Mesa area. And later, Gabe Valdez and his son Greg and some other folks went in there too and witnessed the same thing. They, take photographs of the landscape in that area, and later they'd have craft appear. And later they took that into a lab at it's called God damn it, I want to say Sandos Laboratories.
Sandia?
It's not Sandia Laboratory, yeah. Too many things to keep in my brain. And they'd get some of these developed and blown up, and they were able to see that they were actually experimental aircraft, U.S. aircraft with different emblems and things on them. So Bennewitz, he's kind of like a mad genius. He was figuring out ways to photograph the stealth technology and passing this information on to other folks as well. And he was getting too close to the truth. Eventually, he just went over the deep end. Once again, became convinced that there were aliens out there at Dulce base, that there had been some kind of confrontation between the government station there at the base and the aliens, and there had been a shootout. And there was certainly some type of operations going on there as well, because Bennewitz, as well as Gabe Valdez and others, saw evidence of that now. And, they also claim they found air vents and this type of stuff, which indicated a secret base. And they saw, witnessed strange craft coming out of Archuleta Mesa. But Doty also, perhaps to confuse the issue, claimed that he had set up props up there to confuse researchers and basically direct Bennewitz's interest more into Dulce than what was going on at Kirtland Air Force Base.
So Paul Bennewitz is flying. He's a pilot, and he's flying over this area and seeing evidence of what he thinks is some sort of underground base. And how does he come to believe that, it's a joint alien-human base and, kind of the details around that?
Part of it, both himself and others, the Valdezes, witnessed Chinook helicopters and military aircraft there, so that was part of it. Bennewitz saw evidence of a crashed craft that most likely was probably some stealth technology, but for some reason he believed it was a joint ET craft, and they actually did an expedition out there to Gabe Valdez and others did to look at this craft. So that, as well as the stuff Bennewitz was getting over his computer and hints that Doty was providing him, that it was a alien base. I mean, it was like a feedback loop. Once Bennewitz got in his head there was ETs out there, I don't know what came first, whether Doty or whoever hinted that, then he went out looking for it, and he got messages through his computer. Eventually, he believed, that it was a joint base, and he was fed information that there had been this confrontation there, which later became known in UFO lore as the Dulce War, or the Dulce firefight. And this is one of those legends that seems to get repeated multiple times in different ways over the years, that basically there was some falling out between the humans there, military counterparts, and their aliens that they were working there with those secret bases where they were doing genetic experiments, secret craft, whatnot. And anyway, they had a war, a firefight, and that became a new phase, in this Dulce story. Now, Bennewitz got this information, and it was like published. Hints of it were published in the early 80s, but it really didn't become a thing until the late 80s, when John Lear and some other folks appeared on the scene. And that's the beginning of another phase of this whole Dulce disinformation, misinformation story.
I believe you've written or said somewhere that Dulce was kind of the point in the UFO community where UFOs went from like being considered like light and love, being like benign, I guess would be the word, to like what you call the dark side hypothesis. Could you explain that?
Yeah, and that's you've had access to book I'm working on deals with this topic, and that's in the foreword by David Perkins, who's he was involved in that whole scene during that period, so knew all of these players. But he calls it the dark side hypothesis, and it kind of changed in that late 80s period where, before that, for the most part, it had, the, especially going back to the 50s, the Space Brothers were all love and light, and they were here to pass on their knowledge, wisdom, and lead us away from atomic bombs and forever wars, and bring us into an age of enlightenment. And that vibe kind of changed in it kind of started earlier with Betty and Barney Hill, but really with the whole alien abduction phenomena that started in that mid to late 80s period, that was inspired by Bennewitz to a certain extent, and the torch was picked up by these players like Bill Cooper and John Lear and several others that were promoting this these stories that the aliens were evil, at times even tied into the Illuminati or who else, and that they had, these secret genetic labs where they were creating a hybrid race ultimately to take over our planet and enslave mankind.
Tonight, for the first time in history, men and women from all over the world come together via satellite to share their experiences about unidentified flying objects. Live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., LBS presents, in association with Seligman Productions, UFO Cover-Up, live. Please welcome the distinguished actor-producer, our host, Mike Farrell.
Good evening. What do a colonel in the United States Air Force, a waiter in the Soviet Union, a teacher in California, and a former United States president have in common? Well, they all claim to have witnessed unidentified flying objects in the skies. What we're dealing with tonight is a subject of universal interest. Whatever your view, in the next 2 hours you'll hear claims and counterclaims You'll hear some astounding, perhaps disturbing things which...
There's been different phases if you want to look at this as partly an intelligence operation. You had the Bennewitz affair and all that, and then in the later 80s you had the UFO cover-up live, which you told me you watched on YouTube.
Oh, loved it. It was great.
Yeah, and so what that was it could be seen as kind of the culmination of this, what had been going on with Bennewitz, where all these things were pushed out in this TV program hosted by Mike Farrell of MASH. It's kind of a hokey, they didn't pull it off all that well, but everything came out in that. They talked about MJ-12, Roswell, Cash Landrum, which Doty was involved with. Area 51 is mentioned in this, probably one of the earliest mentions of Area 51 before it took off, and also, talking about these ETs in captivity. That was all kind of basically came out of the MJ-12 stories, which came from those secret documents that probably came from AFOSI and Doty. So it was like the continuation or the culmination of this first phase that was going on with this disinformation operation. And shortly after that, you had John Lear come out with the what were called the Dulce Papers.
I mean, UFO Cover-Up Live was definitely amazing. Was that on Fox or was that syndicated? Do you know where that aired?
It aired quote unquote live, even though it really was, a lot of it was pre-recorded. Mm-hmm. And that was the funky thing about it. They said we're talking. Part of it was talking to these government agents who are in the shadows, and their voices are electronically altered. Falcon and Condor, and they're talking about kind of like the secret government program, all the MJ-12 group and the aliens in captivity. And one of those, Falcon, turned out to be Richard Doty. And later he claimed, well, it wasn't him, but maybe it was him, but he was just being a surrogate for somebody else. He's very wishy-washy about...
Slippery.
Yeah, slippery type. But what I'd say was like kind of the different phase in this operation. After that, Bill Moore kind of left the scene. He had that kind of meltdown thing at the MUFON conference in 89, where he admitted that he'd been kind of he'd been working with the government. It'd been a trade-off. They promised him they'd give him pass on classified information if he'd keep tabs on different UFO researchers and report back to the government. Anyway, he came clean with all that, and he was seen as a pariah and basically kicked out of ufology. But then you had these other people come on scene, and one of them was the revival or the continuation of the Bennewitz story, or misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, that John Lear started promoting. And all of this, these guys, Bill Cooper and a few others, fed off each other, and they all had a little bit different twist to the story.
One thing that I think kind of highlights that and the role that the disinformation plays in our larger culture is if you talk to somebody about Roswell and the whole story that there was this crashed UFO from the 40s and it was covered up, people think that that's like something that's been in the culture that we've known about since 1947 or whenever that was. But I mean, that's a story that came up relatively recently.
Well, it really started in 1980 with Bill Moore, once again, who became, an agent for the government, or, worked with Doty, and so he, that was from research that Stanton Friedman was also involved in the late 70s, and they got wind of, a witness to this crash, Jesse Marcel, who was with the intelligence guy with the Army or Air Force or whatever, who went out and investigated this crash of something or other that could have been a number of things at, whether it was some type of weather balloons, could have very well been the case. They had those mogul balloons during that period, which some have pointed to, which were basically intelligence gathering instruments. If there had been some type of atomic testing that the Soviets were doing, these type of balloons would be able to pick those up. And so anyway, that grew over time. And the thing is with this information, in the book, The Roswell Incident, what Friedman and Moore were kind of speculating about, that there was a government group, was this was confirmed or possibly confirmed with the MJ-12 documents that came out in '84, 4 years later, saying that there had been a crash in Roswell, and they had, recovered the craft, and that there were aliens, and later evolved there was a alien survivor. And then, that came out in UFO Cover-Up Live. So this keeps going on and on. The stories kind of get repeated in different ways. It's like the Dulce War thing. There's also a version at Area 51 where there was a similar type of confrontation in it. A few other stories along that line. So they use the same, a lot of the same themes and stories over and over again.
Wow. Have you read Annie Jacobson's book, Area 51?
I have not, actually.
It's really interesting. Like, her books are all really interesting because she's almost like a stenographer for various government entities. She wrote one I read recently, which is it was called Survive, Kill, Vanish, I think. And it was Surprise, Kill, Vanish. And it was about, CIA special operations and, just interviewing operators and kind of telling their side of the story, which it's just kind of doesn't seem to be hypercritical or really looking into. So the Area 51 book is, the reason I bring it up is because I think there's a crossover here because she interviewed all these people that worked at Area 51, and it was this kind of really interesting look at Area 51 that I think, we'd never be privy to otherwise because all these people have security clearances and it's top secret, and then it gets to it reads like a very traditional kind of institutional biography, and then it gets to the end, and then one of the guys is oh, by the way, I saw ETs. And then it takes this turn, total turn, the last part of the book's about, how all these people are saying aliens are real. And it just feels to me all right, we dangled her along. Now let's really screw with her head.
Yeah. Well, that was the story. There had been the one of the things that was coming out in the late '80s was, there was this, there was different aliens at Area 51. There were some bad guy aliens, and there was the benevolent ones, they were called. And there was a war, and the Greys or whoever took over the place, but then eventually they were defeated by the benevolent ones who returned control over to, the humans there. And so, craziness.
So Serpo, that was the story that
Well, there was an exchange program between the ETs and the U.S. government. They brought some ETs here, and we sent astronauts to their planet, Serpo. And it some of that ties into what was in the MJ-12 papers about, different stuff Doty had pushed out in the past about this secret exchange program, and it also, was featured in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which, Jacques Vallée and Hynek were involved in, and they come up in a lot of this related to a lot of these different projects. So maybe, it was one of these ongoing things, and it seems to get regurgitated over the years. Recently, 10 years pass and people start talking about Serpo again. It's like, dude, and this has been proven to be a hoax, but these it's like clockwork every 10 years or so.
Year is 1942, 1960, 1980, somewhere around there. I'm not 100% sure. Whenever President Roosevelt was president, okay? A UFO came down and crashed in Nevada. A lot of people knew about that, right? I forget what it was called. I'm high as fuck already off of a couple hits, but you guys know what I'm talking about, that Roswell crash in Area 51, okay? So pretty much what happened was there were survivors there, all right? Survivors as in aliens, okay? We tweaked out. We didn't know what the fuck to do. We brought them in, right, to Area 51 in a contaminated spot. Not contaminated, quarantined spot. Hit this one more time. It's dead, never mind. Brought them in, and we talked to them. Not as in we, but as in the leaders of the world, all right? The president, probably a couple of his, beneaths. But anyways, we found these fucking aliens, talked to them, right? And they were dipping. They're going home, all right? They gave us some sort of technology. We were very nice to them, apparently. And they offered, here's the thing, they're leaving, right? They fixed their shit. They shared information with us, not like, I don't know how, okay? I'm not a fucking, I wish I was there, I really did. I really do. But they shared information, built their shit in a very quick amount of time, and they were leaving, right? And they offered, these aliens, they offered to take people back to their planet 37 light years away, okay? And people volunteered to go. That's the craziest fucking thing, bro. 12 people volunteered to go, all right? So they're getting ready, bro, and these aliens are just talking, ready to leave. Imagine being one of them 12 people suiting up, going on a UFO, and flying to the aliens' planet, bro. Dipped all the way to fucking planet Serpo, all right? Insane the shit that they saw. I'm gonna rip this again, though.
Do you know what happened to Paul Bennewitz?
Well, he's no longer with us. He died in around the time Greg Bishop was finishing up his Project Beta book, which was in the early 2000s. He tried to get an interview with Bennewitz a few times, but by that time, Bennewitz had totally removed himself from ufology and basically had a mental breakdown sometime in the mid to late 80s and was put into a mental health facility for a period of time by his family, because basically having to do with all this craziness involving ETs, he really went off the deep end.
My name is Tom DeLonge. A lot of people know me from my band Blink-182. I started that band when I was 16. As an artist, I kind of conquered, in some respect, what I wanted to do with music. I couldn't believe where I got, and I was like, okay, well, this is a great time to try and do something else.
I recognized that there were people in government that wanted to engage the public on topics that unfortunately had a stigma, even though they were based in scientific fact. At the time, there was no mechanism for them to do this. Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects. And they have all taken tremendous risks to themselves and their reputations to do something that can benefit the world. They wanted to be a part of something special, to be a part of a company that could not only change the way we see ourselves, but also change the path humanity is on.
So we've been talking about this Air Force kind of injecting itself into the UFO movement. And what do you make of the leaks that have been happening the last couple of years from the Air Force?
Or the DOD,
or Pentagon or whatever. Is there a connecting tissue, do you see? Or?
it's hard to say. There might be multiple agendas here. I'm very suspicious of all this stuff, and they keep rolling these things out with a lot of the same information over and over. We about these videos. I think we know all we can know about them. That these ones that the TTSA are involved with, and you see different confirmations coming from the Department of Defense, but also at the same time, they're denying some of the stuff that, like, TTSA group and particularly Lou Elizondo has been saying. So there's been a lot of contradictory stuff, but it seemed to me part of it was all of this has been initially was a well-coordinated PR campaign by people, journalists connected to TTSA, and kind of it helped roll out the launch of the To the Stars Academy, who's got these different spooks involved. So part of it seems like they wanted to market, and so they're using contacts, it appears, within the government to help them do that, but also there might be a spook thing going on here as well,
So I guess the question is Tom DeLonge Paul Bennewitz or Bill Moore in the story?
I don't know if he's either one exactly. He seems more, some of the journalists like Leslie Keene might be the Bill Moore, but he's the agent that helps promote this story, the face of this group. And if you're now, there's one thing, and maybe this is all just to make money, but if it's an intelligence operation, then that's basically a way of bringing more people into the fold, And so he's like the face of this operation, probably perhaps just an unwitting dupe. Who knows? I really don't know.
Are you seeing UFOs yet? I don't blame you if you are. Fact of the matter is that regardless of whether or not extraterrestrials exist, it'd be far too easy for U.S. intelligence, or any intelligence agency for that matter, to latch onto this and manipulate the UFO scene, the so-called ufologists, to their own ends. In fact, they'd be crazy not to. And I'd like you to just think about the larger ramifications of that for a second. If the AFOSI and one well-placed agent is able to create this whole X-Files thing that we have going on in popular culture today, what else are the intelligence agencies capable of? Thanks for listening to the Failed State Update. Be sure to check me out. Find me on Twitter at Lenny Flatley, or you can contact me through my website, lennyflatley.net.